A pleasant day, everyone. Today we'll be having EDUC 70, facilitating learner-centered teaching. And for this presentation, we'll be starting up with our chapter 2, Metacognition, Thinking About Thinking, and down to our lesson 3, Metacognition and Metacognitive Knowledge. So from our previous lessons, you are already familiar with what is metacognition, from the cognition to metacognition. And to this presentation, we will be having, or you will be identifying the leveling of the cognition, or the process of the metacognition into your students. Once again, we will be having these lessons as checking how to apply this with our profession, teaching. Once again, this is Miss Clofelyn D. Baes, your instructor for this subject. To start with, I have here Pooh, and he is thinking, and thinking, because this lesson will be revolving around thinking. And with that, I have here a saying from Margaret Mead: children must be taught how to think, not what to think. And this reminds me of a very familiar sayings from Lao Tzu. He said, "Give a man a fish, feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime." So as a teacher, we have the responsibility to teach our students how to think, not just what to think. So what does it mean? So in learning, they need to know the procedure. They need to know the process of thinking, not just think, okay? Not just what to think, because what to think is just the first step. But the how to think are the ladder of thinking, or having the procedure, having the application of what they have learned from you. And from Lao Tzu, okay, give a man a fish, feed him for a day. It is just for a day. The man will just benefit for a day. But if you're going to teach the man to fish, it will be beneficial for him for a lifetime. So it's for the sake again of our students, because learning will not end from what they have learned, but it will continuously grow and develop as they apply what they have learned from school, or from you specifically as teachers. Okay? And for this lesson, I have here the very confused friend, and he is a B. And then imagine, as English teacher, we will be, or you will be presenting a literary piece to your student. And then here is my friend, or here is your student, Mr. B, that is very curious about something about your literary piece, about the story or novel or a poem that you gave. And then from there, he asked, "What do I know about this story?" This question indicates planning from him, okay? His first step in learning your literary piece. And then, if he asks, "Am I understanding the message of the author has written?" that means he is already monitoring himself if he has the process, or the lesson or the message is processing in his mind. Once again, this is cognition or metacognition. This is within himself. This is within his cognition or cognitive process. Okay, thinking process. And then lastly, if he is very confident with conviction that he said at the end, "I am sure my answer is correct." Every literary piece or every stories that you're giving to your students, there are guide questions after or before, either the two, di ba? But if your students already have the confidence in answering the questions that you have given, that means he is into the evaluation process and his thinking process. Once again, from the first question that he asked to himself, o yung pinaka-first niya na cognitive process or thinking process, ibig sabihin, nasa planning stage siya. But, if he ask kung naiintindihan na ba niya yung story na binigay nyo, ibig sabihin, he is into the monitoring level of cognition. And lastly, kapag confident na siya, na may alam na siya dun sa tinuturo mo, it is because nasa evaluating stage na siya. Of course, yung pinaka-final kasi nun, yung approval mo as a teacher. But, if your students can deal with this three dialogue, that means they're experiencing metacognition. There is metacognition within your students. And that is great. Okay? And for my friend, a very conscious or curious B, he is now having the metacognition within himself. Okay, once again, let's have metacognition. From our previous lessons, we had the definition of it. But in this lesson, we'll be focusing into three definitions of metacognition. The first one is thinking about thinking. Second one is the knowing about knowing. And lastly is the cognition about cognition. And like what I've said with my friend Mr. B, if you're into the thinking about thinking, you are already planning. If you're into knowing about knowing, you are into monitoring stage. And if you are into the cognition about cognition, that is already evaluating. You can check if you already know what is happening with that learning process that you are having. Okay, again, planning, monitoring, and evaluating. 3 on 3 tayo, no? And then later on, we still have another 3 on 3 for this lesson. So, let's have now the 3 components of metacognition. First one is the knowing about knowing, that is declarative knowledge. And under the declarative knowledge of information, okay, yung nasa process na tayo, di ba, ng thinking. And yung pinaka-first one is knowledge about things, knowledge about one's abilities, knowledge about factors affecting one's own performance. So, makikita nyo din dito sa definition, sa tatlong definition na nasa planning stage siya ng pagkatuto o pagkaalam ng mga bagay-bagay na kailangan niyang alamin. Kasi kagaya dito, knowledge about things. Okay? Halimbawa nga yung pagbabasa ng isang literary piece. Kasama dyan sa planning yung saan siya magbabasa, comfortable ba siya, yung posisyon niya ba maayos, yung lighting, maayos ba yung lugar niya, well ventilated ba, magiging comfortable ba siya sa pagbabasa o sa pagkatuto. Okay? Next one is knowledge about one's own abilities. Ayan, pag yung mga estudyante mo nagsasabi pa lang sa umpisa no, ng pagbabasa ng isang literary piece ay mabilis silang maboard. They're very honest, no? Kasi may experience nyo yan. May mga vocal students kayo talaga na kahit yung parang walang preno na kasi they can give their sites directly or explicitly sa'yo, no? At pag sinabi nila yung ganun, na naboboard sila sa pagbabasa ng literary piece, ay kasi nandun sila sa planning stage. Nandun pa lang sila sa declarative knowledge. Alam nila na nakaka-board magbasa. And as teacher, ikaw yung magpapapunta sa kanila dun sa sunod na level ng thinking process nila para hindi lang sila magstay into the declarative knowledge. Yung sinasabi natin kaninang first step, dito papasok yung what to think sa declarative knowledge. Okay? Next one is knowledge about factors affecting one's own performance. Ayan. So, for this one, yung thinking process na sinasabi natin, what if may mga difficulties yung estudyante nyo, so you need to take into consideration yon. Kasi pasok pa siya dun sa declarative knowledge nila. Okay, and once again, as teacher, you need to be aware about these components of metacognition kasi these are visible into your students. Most especially kapag face-to-face na tayo, mamamonitor nyo na yan kasi this is applicable sa elementary students and high school students. Okay? Also with the college, but sa college kasi lalo kayo ngayon, 'di ba? Independent learning. So, once again, it's really hard for me to weigh the components of your own metacognition because I can see how the process is going on within you guys. So, bear with me pa din because of this pandemic. Okay? Next component of metacognition is the procedural knowledge. So, papasok na rin to dun sa how to think because under procedural knowledge is the knowledge or the knowledge rather on how to do things. So, meron na ditong process. So, procedural na, okay? And then knowledge on how to execute skills. So, nakita nyo, from the level 1, declarative knowledge, alam nila yung information. But under procedural, they know how to act. They know how to move na because of their procedural knowledge. Okay, nagle-level up na po tayo within their thinking process, within their metacognition. And then after that, we will be having the conditional knowledge. Once again, metacognition is thinking beyond thinking. This will not be beyond thinking if there is no conditional knowledge because conditional knowledge, it is on when and why to apply cognitive acts. Okay, from knowing what are the things they need to know and then followed by the process or the procedure, what they are going to do. Sa conditional, makikita na nila kung para saan yung learning na o yung knowledge na kinukuha nila o na ina-acquire nila from declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge and then do it with their conditional knowledge. Also, conditional knowledge is the knowledge on when a strategy is appropriate. Again, this is thinking process. So, papasok na din dito sa conditional, yung sa Bloom's taxonomy natin na create. Okay, evaluating and create. Na kasi, for example, no, ipasok naman natin yung baking. Layo muna tayo dun sa student and teacher. For example, baker ka. Sa declarative knowledge, ayan, alam mo yung mga ingredients, alam mo kung alam mo na yung mga components ng isang cake, halimbawa, 'di ba? So, flour, sugar, eggs, any kinds ng sweetener or flavors that you want to have within your cake. And then, sa procedural, papasok na dun yung baking. Okay? How many Fahrenheit, how many degrees yung oven, 'di ba? Ilang eggs, yung how to beat them, i-fold lang ba, 'di ba? Yung butter mo or whatsoever. Yung procedure ng pagbe-bake papasok sa procedural knowledge. But in conditional knowledge, andito na yung tasting test. Okay? Kung pasok ba sa banga yung cake, yung lasa ng cake na ginawa mo. For example, from the declarative to procedural, ang alam mo ay chocolate cake yung cake mo. But, nung tinikman mo yung cake mo, it tastes like vanilla. So, ang layo. Hindi appropriate yung strategy na ginawa mo. So, hindi din pasok yung pag-apply mo nung knowledge mo from declarative to procedural. Kaya sa conditional, magfe-fail. Okay? So, hindi naging okay or naging successful yung ending. Defeated yung purpose because there is something wrong with the procedural knowledge and declarative knowledge. You need to have good foundation from declarative knowledge to procedural knowledge before getting a successful conditional knowledge. Once again, this is not abrupt. Okay, this is one by one process. Again, parang ang simple lang kasi nag-iisip pa lang yung mga estudyante nyo. This is revolving around thinking process, but nakikita nyo dapat yung ladder, yung pag-step one by one ng thinking process ng estudyante mo into your lesson. Okay? Hindi pwedeng mag-end lang talaga sa declarative knowledge. Again, kapag hindi ka nakarating sa maayos na conditional knowledge, defeated yung purpose ng metacognition ng estudyante mo. It will not, or you will not be an effective teacher for that. Okay? I'm not saying na kapag hindi matalino yung estudyante mo ay hindi ka na effective na teacher. But case to case, no? May mga time kasi na ilang percent yung estudyante mo hindi talaga naunawaan yung lesson na ibinigay mo. So, defeated yung purpose. Hindi nagkaroon ng maayos na foundation from the declarative knowledge to procedural and up to the conditional knowledge. So, once again, you need to bear in mind these three components of metacognition. Once again, like what Lao Tzu said, diba? Hindi mo kailangang magbigay lang ng ng isda at magbe-benefit yung tao for one day, okay? Pero bigyan mo sila ng ways para masustain nila kung ano ba yung kailangan nila sa buhay, 'di ba? Para magbe-benefit sila ng long term, not just short term. Kasi nga sa estudyante mo, kaya tayo nag-aaral from elementary, junior high school, senior high school, up to college is to obtain conditional knowledge. Okay? Maybe we can think na yung elementary stage natin, declarative knowledge yung alam natin. High school ay procedural. And then sa college, eto na, conditional knowledge na dapat kayo. Diba? That is very broad example. But this applies in every lesson that you're giving to your student. Okay, ganun siya ka-specific kasi every lesson, kaya nga siya lesson, ay may lesson na kailangan makuha yung estudyante nyo. Pero kung hindi makukuha ng estudyante nyo yung lesson na ibinigay nyo dun sa discussion or sa mga assessment pa and the likes, it will not be a successful learning process. Kasi sa thinking process pa lang or sa metacognition pa lang ng estudyante nyo, ay hindi na naging okay. Okay? For the worthy description of components of metacognition, here it goes, okay? Declarative knowledge, once again, personal knowledge. Declarative knowledge is the knowing about knowing, the planning, and the personal knowledge. Learner's knowledge about things. It is also refers to the learner's understanding of own abilities and knowledge about oneself as a learner and of the factors that moderates one's performance. This type of knowledge is not accurate as the learner's evaluation of his or her capabilities may be reliable. Learner semantic roles is one of the basic example of declarative knowledge. So let's focus into the example of declarative knowledge. Pasok po dito no yung for example, your students know the plural form of the verb and so on and so forth. Pasok siya sa declarative. Kasi alam lang nila kung ano yung plural ng isang irregular verb, yung mga ganon. Semantic kasi, 'di ba? So yung words yung pinag-uusapan natin. If your students can do that, ibig sabihin, nandun na sila sa declarative knowledge because they are aware dun sa mga bagay na yon, sa words na gagamitin nila, no? But if your students are still not familiar with those things, wala pa rin sila sa declarative knowledge. Wala sila dun sa planning, sa isip nila, dun sa thinking process nila, wala sila dun sa planning part. Okay? Personal knowledge po. Pasok din dito yung schema, yung background knowledge. Okay? So, kailangan lang siya ma-trigger dun sa mga information pa. New information pa na ibibigay mo as a teacher. For the part of procedural knowledge, this is the task knowledge. Again, procedural knowledge is task knowledge also. This knowledge involves how to do things and how skills or competencies are executed. That is period. The assessment on the learner's task knowledge includes what knowledge is needed, ano yung contents from declarative knowledge, and the space available to communicate what is known or yung length. Paano yung process na mangyayari. And a learner given a problem-solving task, for instance, knows the prerequisite information and prior skills are necessary to be recalled and readily executed to the given time to solve problem. So once again nga sabi ko sa inyo, first step yung declarative knowledge. Kung wala kang declarative knowledge, ano yung gagawin mo sa procedural knowledge? Wala kang magagawang process. Wala kang magagawang procedure like in problem solving. Kung hindi mo alam yung formula from the declarative knowledge, paano mo siya masosolve within your procedural knowledge? So, wala na siya agad. Hindi na talaga agad makakarating sa conditional knowledge. And then for conditional knowledge, ito na po yung strategy knowledge. It refers to the ability to know when and why various cognitive acts should be applied. Ito yung sinabi ko kanina. And it involves using strategies to learn information or knowing how to know, as well as adapting them to novel contexts, knowing when a strategy is appropriate. Ayan. So, andito na talaga tayo sa evaluating. So, kung hindi ka marunong mag-know how to know and mag-know when a strategy is appropriate, ibig sabihin, wala ka pa sa conditional stage. Again, teachers, dito papasok yung assessment na ibibigay natin sa estudyante. How to check conditional knowledge is by our assessments. Okay? Groupings man yan, individual activity man yan, summative assessment ba yan, or objective yan. So, it depends on how you're going to check the conditional knowledge of your students. But, it is very important to check kung nasa conditional knowledge na ba yung mga estudyante nyo. Hindi pwedeng ma-left behind ang conditional knowledge kasi paano mo din nga sila ma-assess and paano mo din sila ma-evaluate kung nasaan na yung level nila of understanding dun sa lesson mo. Okay? So, conditional knowledge is very important into metacognition. Hindi siya pwedeng hindi present at the end. Okay? And lastly, is the metacognitive knowledge. Like what I've said, we will be having metacognition and metacognitive knowledge. Why is it the last part? It is because the result of individuals' metacognitive experience. You will not be having metacognitive knowledge if you don't have declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge. So again, those are the components of metacognition. So, how come that you will be having metacognitive knowledge if wala ka nung tatlong yon? Okay, it is very impossible. According to Plavel, 1979, he explained them as experiences that an individual has through which knowledge is attained or through regulation occurs. ayan, na-achieve na, okay, yung learning process na gusto from 1 to 3, nga, from declarative, procedural, and conditional. A learner who obtains low scores on knowledge and skills test becomes aware that he or she has low declarative and procedural knowledge, of course. Kasi yung mga basic natin, 'di ba, may iba't iba nga tayong klase ng assessment, meron nga yung review lang, meron yung quiz lang, ganyan, and evaluated but not recorded, yung mga ganun-ganun klaseng assessment. Makikita na natin yun, no, sa declarative and procedural pag hindi na sila nakascore ng mataas. Pero, at wala na rin syempre chance to achieve the conditional kasi declarative and procedural pa lang ay hindi na naging successful. So, you need to help your students to obtain or to achieve the metacognitive knowledge, not just the three, but rather metacognitive knowledge para masabi natin na may metacognition yung estudyante. Last input about this one is, similarly, metacognitive knowledge depends so much on the learner's meta-memory. Ito yung nabanggit ko kanina na schema, the knowledge of what memory is, how it works, and how to remember things. If you don't have meta-memory, wala kang background knowledge, or wala kang background information, wala kang stock knowledge, and it's very impossible dun sa mga estudyante na hawakan natin. Kasi, baby lang, okay? Baby lang yung parang blank paper, yung mind nila na kailangan malagyan ng information. And, yung mga estudyante na mahahawakan natin, ilang taon na sila nabubuhay sa mundo, no? So, imposible na they don't have schema or background knowledge. Kailangan lang natin sila i-trigger. Kailangan lang natin or tulungan natin yung mga estudyante natin na i-process yun, okay? At kung paano yun ipaprocess. Yun nga, how to think. Not just what to think, but how to think of those information na meron na din talaga sila within themselves. Through instruction and individual effort, meta-memory develops over time. Take note of that. It will develop over time kasi practice makes perfect. So, kapag lagi tayong nagtitrigger ng background information, ay madedevelop yun. Lagi na natin siya mare-recall, lagi na natin siya matatandaan, and maa-apply. For instance, learners who have been taught how to organize information and use rehearsal strategies have richer meta-memory. If your students have good study habits, na organize sila ng maayos sa information, and for sure, they do have rich meta-memory. They can retrieve declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge when required by a task. So, ibig sabihin na i-imbak ng maayos yung ideas o yung memory nila, and it will help them para ma-process yung declarative, procedural, and conditional knowledge under metacognition. Okay, once again, these are application of concepts into your students. Again, we are under facilitating learner-centered teaching, EDUC 70. That's why we need to know this 3 or 4, the 3 components of metacognition, and of course the metacognitive knowledge. We need to bear this in our mind so that we can guide our students in their right paths. Okay, for this lesson, that would be all. Thank you for listening, and take care, and God bless.